In this podcast, I interview Dr. Orin Davis about flow, which is when someone gets fully absorbed in a task and feels like they're locked in or in the zone. Orin studied under Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is famous for studying flow and writing the book Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. Hello, everyone. My guest today is Dr. Orin Davis, holder of the first doctorate awarded in positive psychology, lecturer at Columbia University, and principal investigator at the Quality of Life Laboratory. And today we're going to be discussing flow and some related topics. So, Orin, maybe to get started, can you tell me a little bit about how you got interested in positive psychology and flow?
Well, I was always interested in self-actualization, so getting into flow from there was not a big stretch. We were looking at how people do them be their best, and part of that is like people's best experiences, people's best performances. Flow seemed to be part of all of that. So that's kind of how I got into it. Read Csikszentmihalyi's book probably back in like 2004, 2005, a few years before I started grad school. And when I applied for my PhD, I wanted to work with him, and we connected very well. I thought he was a really great guy. And so I ended up continuing my work on flow and getting to do research with him on it.
Okay, that's really cool. And is that where you ended up doing your PhD?
Yeah, that's how I ended up doing the first doctorate in positive psychology. He was starting this. He had left U Chicago and was doing this new program at Claremont, and so I followed him there basically, to do this new program. And it, I was originally going to do social psychology, but then, I ended up in this an organizational psychology program. So I'm a sociocognitive psychologist who applies it to the workplace.
And just to get started, you maybe give an overview of what flow is and like what's involved in getting into that.
Well, so it's actually very extensive, but as a brief overview, it's a feeling of effortless concentration where you're applying, above average level skills to something that's challenging to you, where you feel like you're doing the activity for its own sake and you really get lost in it. And how to get into that, that's the subject of a lot of debate. And there's a lot of attempts to understand what exactly gets us into flow experiences. And there's no good answer to that, despite the claims of certain folks. There's really no good answer to that yet.
Okay. In the book, it discusses different attributes, or in the book Flow. Do you think you need all these different attributes, or is it just a spectrum, or it's how do you view that? How much is it a binary, and how many aspects are needed?
So the 9 characteristics of flow, they show up very often. It is well debated, and even Csikszentmihalyi, when I was his grad student, he and I were actually talking about whether all 9 characteristics really are required for flow experience to emerge. Again, jury's out on that. Csikszentmihalyi was definitely not certain that we needed all 9. Neither am I. But a flow experience is emergent, and what typifies a flow experience? So there's a couple things where one would imagine that it would be hard to have a flow experience without these 9 characteristics. It's hard to imagine an experience without them, but I wouldn't say it's beyond the pale, and I wouldn't say that it's impossible. Probably in my mind, the only characteristics that really need to be there are the autotelic aspect, the idea that, we're doing something for its own sake. We're doing the activity because we like doing the activity, and the deep immersion. And I think that those two, I can't imagine a flow experience without those. But I would argue that it's very hard to get the experience of flow without, for example, the clear goals, the feedback that tells you whether you're achieving those goals, the high level of challenge, the application of high level skill, all the rest of it. I feel like that's probably going to contribute to what this flow experience is going to be.
Okay. And the flow experience, there's a range of activities people could be doing. So some of them are more cognitive, some of them are more physical. Is it really the same experience in all these cases, that they feel the same way, even in one way when they're thinking very deeply and one way when they're not thinking at all, for example?
Well, so on the one hand, there's no way to know. But then again, do we know, what do we know about any two people's experiences? You love eating pizza, I love eating pizza. Is it the same love? Is it the same experience eating pizza? So it's a similar thing. When we're talking about flow, we have found that, at least in the limited way that we're assessing flow, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, we're seeing that people make similar statements about it. And we find that when we give them quantitative measures about it, they rate the activities the same way if they're experiencing flow. It's a bit of a circular argument, so I want to acknowledge that I am a scientist after all. So, but nonetheless, yes, it would seem that flow is independent of the activity as long as the way you feel about that activity is conducive to a flow experience, as long as you can do it automatically. So we don't find a lot of people experiencing flow while eating, for example. That doesn't mean you can't, but it means that probably if you're having, a flow experience while eating, you probably know a lot about food, or you're probably learning a lot about food, or you're probably like making a very strong sensory experience out of it. Or you're not just, casually munching on a bag of chips.
Another question is, how essential do you think flow is to happiness? Because in the book Flow is like, this is going to be a book about happiness, and then just focuses on flow as like, this is how you live a happy life. But I could see it as just being one aspect among many aspects. So I'm wondering like your thoughts there.
Well, I'm going to have to borrow from, my Jewish roots as I do for self-actualization and a lot of my inspiration in positive psychology and say it depends on how you define happiness. There are many, many forms of well-being, and part of what we find in flow is that it promotes a very genuine well-being experience. And we find that people who do have a lot of flow experiences or who have consistent flow experiences report greater well-being on many of the metrics that we use for this. So would I say that a life without flow is a life without happiness? I'm not willing to go that far, but I am willing to say that most people who have a positive overall view of their life in some way tend to have more flow experiences, tend to have experienced flow, tend to have a consistent way of experiencing it. And it certainly is a great experience and something that once people have had a taste of it, they want more of it. There are some people that sort of think of flow as a more everyday experience. I argue that it is more taste of the ineffable, and that many of our attempts to describe it reduce it to linguistic terms so that we can transfer information about it from one person to another, like we can't read minds. But I think it really is a powerful experience when we have it, and therefore something that we try to measure, we try to understand, but still difficult.
And how often, if someone has, the right traits and the right setup, how often do you think they could experience flow usually?
Maximum a few times a day. You can't spend your day in flow. Flow is a high energy state, and it takes a lot of energy to experience flow. So it's the kind of thing where, like, after you've had a flow experience, the main thing you need is a rest. You're probably tired. Because it requires such a high expenditure of energy, I'm trying to imagine somebody having flow experiences more than 3 or 4 times a day. I don't think so. Most people are not even going to experience flow every day, but I think that people certainly have frequent flow experiences. I think that it's possible for people to have multiple per day, but I think that that's somebody who have to be doing really, really good energy management.
And since it's only something that happens occasionally, is there like a spillover effect in terms of how it makes one feel the rest of the day, or how does it affect like the time when they're not in flow?
So again, I think that there's a mixed bag on this, but a lot of what we have found is that when people have a flow experience, we certainly see some spillover effects into their well-being in general, both in the short term and in the long term. But again, the data are a bit limited on that, so I want to be careful as to how strongly I frame this. Nonetheless, the other thing that you have to keep in mind is, once again, it depends on your energy management. So, like, flow is going to be conducive to well-being in the long term. Certainly, you feel great after a flow experience, but you also feel tired because you've expended so much energy. So I think there is a general boost to well-being, both in the moment, in the moments after flow. During flow, ironically, it's not actually a positive experience necessarily. That's a whole different ballgame. But after a flow experience, we tend to feel great. That seems to carry, and regular flow experiences seem to provide a boost to well-being.
You say during it, to me, let's say like times I remember like skiing or playing tennis when I really felt in it, locked in, it did feel pretty good. So are you saying that it just varies? Sometimes people just don't it doesn't feel good? Or what do you mean that during it doesn't necessarily feel good?
When you're applying, a high level of your own personal skills to a hard challenge, that's effortful. It's not easy. So when you're doing something hard, there are moments that are not positive when you're trying to do something hard. You're struggling. Probably during a flow experience, you're struggling. You may be enjoying the struggle because, again, this is an activity that you like doing. So, when you're skiing, if you're doing a course, and it doesn't have to be a hard course in general, it has to be a hard course for you. You're skiing down a hard course. You got to work at that. There's a lot of effort. There's a lot of concentration. There's a lot of things. You're probably in a high stress experience. You're loving it. You're loving every minute of it on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's like, not for nothing. This is kind of dangerous, and there are risks to what you're doing, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do this right, and you've got to be careful, and you've got to be precise, and you've got to be good. That's stressful.
Right. So then you're saying in those cases, at the time, one's locked in, but it's a little stressful, but then afterwards they feel, is it like a sense of accomplishment? What makes it so enjoyable afterwards?
I mean, there's a lot of things, but one of them is precisely what you said. Like, you nailed it. You got it. And part of it is the nailing it is not necessarily, for the record, succeeding. You don't actually have to succeed at the task. You have to succeed at giving your best. So, what's interesting is when we put forth good effort, we feel that. Win, lose, or draw, we feel it. And maybe you were skiing down a slope, it was hard. You took a spill, something like that, but you knew that, you took a spill because it was okay, this was just above you. All right, you did your best, but you still felt good, I gave that slope the right effort, right? Or you playing tennis, you said you get flow from tennis. You're playing somebody who's better than you. And you walk out of there, you got your ass kicked, but you know what? You played your best game. And you feel really good about it because you were hitting shots like nobody's business. Your serves were amazing relative to the level that you normally put them over. So you played an amazing game. You feel great about this game, and you got lost in the experience, and you were loving the feel of playing the game. So afterwards, even though you got your ass kicked, you're just feeling really good because it's like, I did it right. I did what I set out to do. I put in the highest level that I had, and I feel great about the level of mastery I showed, even if that wasn't enough to win in the circumstances.
So how would flow compare? Someone, let's say, works hard for a month on something, not necessarily even in flow at all, and then they just feel satisfied afterwards. How would that compare with that moment where they're in the zone and that kind of flow state or flow experience, and then they reflect on it right afterwards? Is there a difference, or it's very similar, like a life satisfaction feeling?
So I think that, mastery experiences like that, they generally feel good. It's a matter of normally when we're talking about flow, we're talking about a shorter term experience. And so when you're comparing mastery over a long term, you're usually that's a moment of looking back, but that's more of a feeling of satisfaction. It's often less exuberance because it's a reflective moment. In flow, when you're experiencing flow, you're coming out of the experience, you finish the activity, and there's an exuberance to it often, but also a feeling of, personal unity. You put your whole self into it. You feel this sense, you feel connection between yourself, the activity. In many cases, when we're experiencing flow, we lose sight of ourselves as the actor. So we're sort of united with the activity in that moment, and then coming out of it, we have that transcendent experience. We've transcended the self in that moment. And in returning to the self, we take with us the feeling that we had a transcendent moment. When you're looking at satisfaction over the long term, that's not necessarily a transcendent moment as much as looking back. The transcendent moment is probably looking back over it and realizing what it was.
So, yeah, you mentioned transcending the self. So I just wanted to discuss a little, how does the flow compare to meditation? Since in meditation, a big goal of it, and various ways that meditation accomplishes this, but they want to transcend the self. So how do you view the difference, if you have any view on that, between a flow and being in meditative states?
So many of these trance states that we talk about all have the element of trance, but that doesn't mean like just because they all have like this one element in common doesn't mean that they're the same or equal or anything along those lines. Flow is very much activity dependent and very, very goal directed. Meditation can be goal directed, but it's often not necessarily going to be a flow experience. Now, here's the thing: you can experience flow while meditating, but one usually doesn't. Because usually in meditation, you're not losing yourself in meditation. Meditation is guiding you towards something else. So part of the problem with this is we've got, it's a bit of a linguistic problem, so to speak, because we've got only so many terms for, hypoegoism and hypoegoic states where we're transcending the self or we're taking ourselves out of something. And because many of these experiences are ineffable, and because many of them are experiences that we're trying to reduce to the plainness of language, it gets hard. Because we have the hypoegoism of meditation very often and the hypoegoism of flow, and they're very similar, but the context in which they occur is really where the difference is. In meditation, you might say that the hypoegoism is the goal, right? Transcending the self is the goal. In flow, transcending the self is sort of just a byproduct. It's part of the experience, but it's not necessarily the goal. And in meditation, the focus is often the goal. And then we take the focus and we're directing it inward towards experiencing something, not necessarily accomplishing something. When you experience flow, you're trying to accomplish something. Whether you do or don't is another ballgame, but you're trying to accomplish something. Often with meditation, it's not as goal-directed.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I also saw in this book, The Mind Illuminated, which is a very detailed manual of meditation. So it actually had a perspective that at this advanced stage where you're fully concentrated on the object of your meditation, it's like called access concentration. And that when you reach that, it actually quotes the book Flow, and it says that if you get in flow in meditation, then you've reached this state. And then that unlocks all these other things like jhana states, which are these deep absorption meditation states. But yeah, it's certainly interesting because also in meditation, if you try too hard for something, that's often counterproductive. And I don't know, in some of these other things, you're saying that like effort is such a key part of it.
Well, trying too hard means you're focused too much on the effort and not enough on the activity.
Right. So I guess even in general, if you're focused too hard on the effort, then that would also potentially break like you from getting into flow, because you want to sort of like effortlessly just get into this very ideal effort. Is that like kind of the idea?
Well, I mean, you're not wrong, but the way I would want to frame it to people is, especially as a matter of like, a guideline, enjoy the activity. Remember that you're doing this activity because you want to, and to focus on doing the activity.
Right. And doing it, you're saying maybe not even to accomplish anything, but just to do the activity because you love the activity on its own.
Exactly. You want to do this. So, for example, like, you like to play tennis. You want to play, like, so you're in there and you want to play your best tennis game. That's the important part. But you want to play your best tennis game, but if this feeling or this desire to play your best is superseding your love for the game, you're probably not going to experience flow, and that's where you're more likely to be trying too hard. You're trying to enjoy the experience of the game and of putting your best effort towards the game because that will enhance your enjoyment.
Right. I mean, it sounds like both meditation and all these other activities, it's this fine balance where you want to be trying really hard, but not feel like you're trying really hard, like not over-efforting, and then it kind of just, where it just comes very naturally.
I would argue that it's not about whether you're trying hard, it's about the purpose of your trying. When you're trying to play tennis, for example, because that will enhance your game, that's when you're more likely to experience flow. When you're trying to play your best tennis because that's for your ego, or because you feel like a failure if you don't, or like I have to win or something along those lines, your goal is different. And therefore your experience of the effort is different. It comes down to why. It's not about whether you try hard or not, it's about why you're trying so hard.
Yeah, I guess also one other difference in these is that both of them, maybe you in some way lose that self while you're doing it, but it could be in meditation because it's so focused on that realization. It's trying to realize something afterwards, so that even afterwards you recognize something about the self and it's like weakened in some way. And these other activities, they're not trying to notice anything about the self on its own. So even if you lose that self while you're in the activity, afterwards you're just back to normal. Is that like a fair way of putting it?
Again, I think too much focus on the loss of the self because, again, in meditation, I think that going for the hypoegoic state is often more of an aim, whereas in flow, it's more of a byproduct. You're not trying to lose the self. It's that you're so focused on the tennis game, you're so focused on the activity that you're going to lose the sense of self. You're not really paying attention to yourself anymore. You're sort of merging with the activity.
And is that merging with activity one of the aspects that makes it enjoyable?
Yeah, because after all, this is an activity that you like doing for its own sake, right? You're playing tennis because you like it. For Jewish audience members or those who might be familiar with the term, it's lishma, right? Like, and that's really like that's the concept of autotelicity, and it. Before we had the word autotelicity, auto self telos goal from the Greek. Before that, we had the Hebrew word lishma, which literally means for its own name. But like we take it as like for its own self, like for its own sake. And that concept, a very, very ancient concept, well over 2,000 years old, is a concept that, has been brought forth and has been found in many, many different traditions, ancient ones. And that's often why, for example, when we look at meditation, we look at, the Hindu practices, the Buddhist practices, they developed similarly, and, other East Asian practices. We look at some of the older practices that developed because they all have very similar concepts here of the hypoegoic state, the high focus, the idea that we do something because it's good to do, or because it feels right to do, or because we like doing it. So that you find that everywhere. I'm loath to make more direct comparisons to some of the Hindu and Buddhist traditions because I don't know them well enough. And I've studied them enough to know that I don't know them well enough.
And this aspect of doing something, for its own sake, it seems that's like a really important aspect in so many areas. You see like startups, often investors will say they want a founder who's just like really dedicated to doing it and not that they just want to make money because they find that they do a better job that way. So why do you think that's so important, that aspect of like just for its own sake, and that otherwise you don't actually accomplish as much?
Because I think that the people who do that, they put in the discretionary effort. You put in more effort when you want to be doing something for its own sake. And I think that's where it is. Incidentally, you brought up the idea of this in business. I actually find that this even gets abused in business. I actually point out that sometimes it's a red flag when companies are saying they want somebody who's passionate about it, because it means they're probably going to get more work out of that person for the same amount of money.
Well, right. I mean, for employees and founders, it's a little different. Founders are expected to work like crazy. So it's a little different.
Founders aren't expected to work like crazy. They just have to get it done.
Right.
Like, I mean, look, it would be ideal to be in a world where founders could also have a level of work-life balance. They just often cannot, because they often cannot afford financially to bring in the level of help that they would need to have an appropriate work-life balance. Now, that may very well be a bad thing. And what's funny is, like, for example, I know a therapist, like when you ask him what he does, he says, I help reintroduce founders to their families. He makes a living that way. Now, I'm not saying that's not an honest living on his part. What I'm saying is the fact that there is enough of a need for someone to make the main focus of their living reintroducing founders to their families. Societal progress should not be coming at the expense of people estranging themselves from those whom they love.
Right. I mean, it certainly sounds pretty bad. I'm not sure how. It's not society that's forcing it. It's just if they want to succeed as a startup. So I'm not really sure how one could avoid that issue. It's not like a big company is forcing the employee to do that. So it's just a much more complicated case.
Actually, we do see big companies forcing employees to do that. And this is where we've been seeing so many issues, for example, in investment banking and a lot of levels of burnout. So no, actually we are seeing that. But also it's the fact that, like, even in the startup world and even in the entrepreneurship world, no, we're not having work-life balance. And the fact of the matter is it's not healthy. It's not good for people. And it's bad for their families. It's bad for the people that their families interact with. I actually think that this may very well be a net negative, and we're just shrugging our shoulders and going, that's the way it has to be. Maybe it doesn't. And maybe it behooves us as a society to hang a question mark on that and also worry about the well-being of founders. Because founder burnout is also real. And the mental health issues that founders deal with, that's also real. And some of those, bad mental health issues that some founders deal with lead to very bad consequences, both for the founders and for the people around them. And some of those consequences, I will point out, can be rather dire. And that's affecting people too. And it affects the business. And not for nothing, there are a whole lot of people that can and should be founders, or that have brilliant ideas, or that are capable of founding companies that don't, because they can't handle the cost to work-life balance. We're depriving ourselves of their talent, their skills, their abilities, and we're asking people to basically put their lives on hold just to take a shot at something. Not always the best thing.
Right. I'm just saying, like, in cases like finance and law, I could imagine like regulations or different ways of addressing the fact that people work too many hours. I think it would be a little harder to address with like literal founders of startups, because there isn't like a boss literally forcing them to. It's just they really want to succeed. So it's just a harder case to try to address as a society, even if it is a problem.
Well, there are financial constraints, and we certainly see, for example, and again, I'm not making a clear definitive statement on this because it's much more complex than this, but we could consider how funding works in the startup world. And when we're talking about companies getting funding, we can think about their work-life balance and how much we might need to fund to ensure that founders have a healthy work-life balance and that teams have a healthy work-life balance. I'm not sure that there's a net societal advantage to teams that don't, because there are a lot of ripple effects that are very hard to quantify. And when founders have horrific work-life balance, that can have an impact on the people around them, and the people around them can have impact on the team, and the people around the team, and the people that support the team. And that can have also negative ripple effects.
Right. It's just sometimes you read these cases like about Bill Gates and other people who, like, in the early days, they had to just work like crazy because if they didn't, then they would just miss out. And it was like a winner takes all kind of environment. So I feel like it would be really hard to coordinate that nobody works like crazy. And there is, it seems, some benefits, at least in the short run, for their company and their products. And I guess just getting back to Flow itself, what do you think are ways if someone wants to, cultivate it and more often have it? What are some tips to do that?
So I think, based on my own research, the most important thing I can say is know yourself. Know what you like to do. Know what kinds of things you can get lost in. Know what kinds of things you're willing to do because you like the experience of doing it. And you might also think about, like, what are tasks or activities that I would like to master? And why do I want to master them? And make sure you have that motivation also, because it's like, if you want to master these things for bragging rights, for instance, like I know somebody, for instance, who was interested in learning about wine because that meant that they could hang out in high society more and all the rest of that stuff. It's like, okay, this is not going to be a flow experience for you. I mean, by all means. But if you want to learn about wine, for example, because that's something you really like, or because you enjoy the experience of the different flavors, and you can make wine, and you're drinking wine into an entire experience. And I see people doing this, that they have a whole sensory experience of it, from the pour to the aeration to the swirl to the smell to the sip to the savoring, and they make a whole thing out of this. So they're drinking wine because they like drinking wine, but like, there's a whole activity of drinking wine. It's not just like, knocking a few back after work or something. And you want to be finding that for all activities for flow experiences, you want to be finding activities where you can enjoy the experience of it, right? But if you love playing tennis, there's an extent to which, like, just the racket feels good in your hand, it feels right. It feels aligned with you. And you can find things, if you don't know what those things are, feel free to go around, experiment, look for things that feel right to you. And, probably, the first time you may have picked up a racket, it may have felt right to you. Maybe it didn't. And for some people, it doesn't. So you might need to have a few experiences with it before you get used to it and it feels right. So take the time to explore. Another thing you can look at is what your value system is. What kinds of activities align with your values? So for instance, one of the things that I value a lot is collaboration. So one of the things that I like is ballroom dancing because I love the experience. I'm more likely to get a flow experience out of the collaboration I have with a partner. And the way I explain, a ballroom dance experience is, it's like two people holding hands painting on the same canvas. You're working on the same painting. And it's the experience of the two of you working together to make this thing. Like I think of like one of the dance partners I had. He's an incredible dancer, and the two of us when we're dancing together, he and I we create a world together, we dance together, and it feels like we're both just immersed in this. I'm building a piece, and he's building a piece, and the moves that we make complement one another, and we create this synergistic experience, and it's really quite incredible. And I love that collaboration with him. And, he and I can kind of get on a certain page where we're like in our own universe, on the dance floor. And that feels amazing.
Right. I feel like in some sense, physical activities, it's a little easier to like get lost into it. And that more intellectual activities, even if it's something a person enjoys, it's hard to really get into that like deep absorption. Like even if someone likes writing or coding or things like that, it's hard to really get in the zone in them. I don't know if you have any tips on why that is or like how to address that.
That statement's not correct.
You're saying it's just as easy to get into it.
It's just as easy. As a matter of fact, we see it a lot.
So it could just be my own personal case. I found it a little harder.
So that may partly be a function of like whether you see that whether you see that as like more work and tedium, or whether you see that as like something you have to do as opposed to something you choose to do. So one of the things that is very important about flow experiences is that they're volitional. Many people we actually find that the most common place for flow to emerge is at work, because we can very much get lost in it. Many of us choose our work based on the things that we like to do, that we're good at doing, that we want to master. So we actually find that many people can get lost in coding, and especially when it's challenging code. Like I've had a couple of flow experiences coding when I'm bug hunting, and there's something in the code, and the code is sort of challenging me there, and I'm trying to dig through and like, where is this bug? What is going on here? Like, what's happening? And I'm running different tests, and I'm highlighting different aspects of code and trying to see like, okay, if I isolate this piece of code, will it work? And yes, it does. Okay, so it's not there, or there's some kind of connector problem. Sometimes it's a syntax problem, and I was getting flow experiences out of that because I was enjoying the experience of coding, but I like that. For me, I was able to view it as problem solving, and I love that sort of thing. I've had flow experiences like solving math and chemistry problems because I like that stuff, and I'm just that kind of nerd. Other people are not. And I mean, that's the thing, is you got to find the place where you've got your nerddom, so to speak. And you know what? In tennis, people sometimes think like physical activities are not a nerddom or something like that. They're wrong about that. There are tennis geeks, like people that they know that they think about tennis. I think the expression these days is that's the Roman Empire. That's what they think about in their spare time. They're thinking about swing. They're thinking about racket. They're thinking about balls, surfaces, movements. You see people really get into this.
Yeah, I wonder if one of the aspects, maybe nowadays, people who are doing a physical activity like are certainly absorbed in it, like if they're literally playing tennis. While people who are doing other things like writing, coding, even though ideally they should be fully absorbed in it, nowadays it's so easy to just get distracted. And I wonder if that makes it harder for people to get into the flow because they're constantly, they're being pinged, or they're on their own, they're just turning to distractions. And I don't know, is that something that you've encountered at all?
So yes, and again, we're talking about like some of the ills of technology, social media, all the rest of that stuff. Yeah, but part of that is, yes, you need to be able to put your phone down. You need to be able to turn off the notifications and say goodbye. I'm going into my little cave, and I'm not coming out till I'm done. And that's an important part of it. And we've allowed ourselves to go into this world of distractibility, and like you see people, they're going out on dates and they're on their phones on the date, and like while their partner's talking to them, or like. We see people that are going to games, and they're, scrolling social media at the game. Like, aren't you here to watch the game? And incidentally, Jason Fried had a really good TED Talk, Why Work Doesn't Happen at Work. And yeah, that will definitely scare a lot of people. We're yanked into useless meetings. I had a boss, I like to refer to him as the king of drive-by meetings. Because he'd walk through the office, he'd see me and realize he wants to tell me something. Hey, Orin, you got a second? Like, I was in the middle of something, man. Like, he's my boss. So, like, I got to go, stop what I'm doing and go to the meeting and talk to my boss about whatever the heck he wants to talk to me about that totally could have waited. It's hard for me to, stay locked into the activity knowing that when my boss walks through the office, I can get yanked away at any second and I kind of need to be attentive when he does. Or that I could get an email from somebody and that ping is going to mean I might need to change course on something. So I got to be ready for that. That makes it hard to get into it. And, even if I am into it, I might then need to get out and do this other thing. And we don't just snap back in, right? Like this really, really silly idea of triggering flow states, like that doesn't happen. Not really. We don't do that. And like when we're trying to create triggers for flow states, no. We can trigger trance states, and that takes a lot of work and a lot of practice, but we trigger trances, but that doesn't get us a flow experience. We can give ourselves signals to focus, but focusing in general is one thing, but then taking that focus and directing it into an activity, that takes more time, more effort. That's more than a trigger. You can't just do that. And that's a cost of distraction. And so we need to create an environment and a context that's conducive to flow. And that's, one of the things that I was finding in my own research is that we do need to take time to effortfully create this pocket of context where we're more likely to have a flow experience.
Yeah, I guess turning a little from work to schools, do you think schools do a good job there in terms of helping kids and students reach, flow states and reach their optimal levels? Or is there a lot more that they could be doing?
There's a lot more that they could be doing. The answer to your question is no. Schools are not doing that. But then again, we're having a bit of a reckoning societally as to what schools are for. So, like, we do need to decide what we want. So before we get into the question of whether schools are promoting flow or teaching students to experience flow, we have to ask ourselves, what are we using schools for now? Because they're different from, at least I'm going to date myself here. I don't mind. I'm 44, and like when I was in school, it was a different game. It was a whole different ball game. It was a whole different experience from what I hear people talking about school now. Like my friends have a lot of kids, what they're telling me their kids are experiencing in school. It doesn't sound like what we were experiencing in school. So I think that schools could be doing a lot more, but part of that is, we need to decide what school is for. And especially with the advent of AI and with the advent of smartphones and distractions and, busy parents and limited work-life balance, school takes on a different meaning now. And as we're looking at more high stakes testing, and as we're looking at accountability, and as we're looking at what role people in a child's life play, we're rethinking that entire bargain. So no, schools aren't doing it. Yes, schools could be doing it. Somebody should be teaching children to experience flow. And I'm a big fan of the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. So I think that village as a whole does need to teach children to have autotelic experiences, to promote self-efficacy, like the belief that you're capable of doing things, promoting mastery. School is a place where that can happen, but there's a whole lot of other places where that could happen, extracurricular activities, family members, friends, folks that, we sometimes refer to as like aunties and uncles and cousins and big sisters and big brothers and big siblings and like other parents and all that stuff. I had a whole lot of those people in my world. Many people do. And they often, can teach us things that add to us, and they may be able to teach us how to have autotelic experiences and flow experiences. We should certainly be doing it somewhere.
Right. I mean, I guess the issue is schools will often teach subjects, and then people will say, like, these aren't practical, we don't need it. And they say, well, we're teaching it to you, no, not for your job, but because, to help you become like a more well-rounded person and things like that. So you would think at a minimum, they should be encouraging people to reach, these kind of things. Like if they're reaching their flow states, it could say like, yeah, it's not for work, but you're reaching an optimal level and it's enjoyable. But if they're not teaching things that are practical and they're not helping people, really reach these optimal states, then it feels like they're just missing something. And then, like, I don't know, we shouldn't just be saying, well, other people could help these kids learn about it. Like, that should be the one thing then that school should still be helping people reach. I guess one more question, I guess, about schools is to reach optimal performance and flow and those related things. It seems a person really needs to be at the edge of their ability and where they're really performing, like it's not too easy, it's not too hard, and they're really like, they're pushing themselves, but it's achievable. But it's the way that many schools group things is they just put people together by age. And then it's impossible, it seems, for everyone to be able to be at their optimal level because there obviously could be a range of different abilities. So does that basically preclude and like kind of just exclude most people from reaching this optimal performance, and that maybe schools should rethink how they group people together?
Well, I agree that schools should rethink how they group people together, but once again, we have to redecide what schools are going to be. I don't want to go off on that tangent. I want to answer your question. So I'm going to grab a story from a guy I used to play Frisbee and squash with back in college, one of the computer science wizards there, and is now working as a computer science wizard. He told a story about he was playing squash against an opponent that he originally thought was going to be an equal, but then realized I'm a lot better than this guy. So he made a decision. He said, you know what? Nothing but lobs. I'm just going to lob the ball every hit, and can I win that way? So what he did was, even though he was playing against somebody much weaker, he found a way to up the challenge for himself. And we can find that, just because we group people by age and not necessarily by ability, that doesn't mean that you can't create challenges. And often, incidentally, one of the biggest challenges that you can have is explaining a concept to somebody who's junior to you in either an ability or an age or something like that. You see these challenges sometimes on YouTube, they're like asking these high-level PhDs, okay, can you explain quantum computing to an 8-year-old? Can you explain quantum computing to a 3-year-old? Now, how well do you, it's a really neat test of how well you know quantum computing. You can add challenge to it in all sorts of ways. So I don't think that precludes a flow experience. I think, again, it's all in what you do with it and how teachers frame working with junior people and working with people who may not be in the same ability category as you. Are they framing this as, all right, just go do your chores, you got to be charitable or something along those lines? Or are they making it an opportunity to strengthen your own understanding by explaining it to somebody else? Or, your challenge is help this person pass their challenges. Are they framing it as a challenge? Are they framing it as an obligation? Are they framing this as charity, which I think is not such a great framing? So part of that is, again, we can create context and we can find ways to mold either the activity or our view of it to make it challenging. This actually builds on some of Dwight Suh's work on the autotelic personality. Dwight Suh was also a student of Csikszentmihalyi as well after I was. He's a professor now at Strathclyde, and he's been working on that, doing some really neat stuff on trying to understand what kind of person and what kind of personal characteristics can we develop that enable us to be more capable of seeing challenges or seeing opportunities or contexts in which we can upgrade the challenge or upgrade the situation or bring ourselves toward a flow experience.
Right. I still think there's an argument that maybe schools don't do such a good job of cultivating that either in terms of...
Oh, they definitely don't. I'm just that. Oh, no. They don't, but they could. And I'm saying, this specific example that you gave about, grouping people by age, that's not a deal breaker as far as people experiencing flow. But if you don't do it right, and I don't think the schools do it right, then yes, you are actually inhibiting flow, and you're probably creating context in which flow is less likely to emerge, and you're giving the students less opportunity to experience it. And I do think that situation obtains here.
Okay, so one other thing I wanted to discuss a little bit, because I know you've studied it, is microflow. So could you maybe just describe briefly what microflow is and how it relates to flow?
So the way I view it is microflow is the optimal experience under suboptimal conditions. Is that when we have situations that are not as conducive to flow, what flow type experience can we carve out of that? And if we compromise the context, are we able to experience some semblance of flow? And what is that semblance of flow?
So can you maybe just give an example to make it like more real?
Sure. So, I mean, let's say for the example I like to give is imagine you're about to meet a friend for coffee and you've scheduled this coffee appointment for 5 o'clock. And you get a text at 5 o'clock, your friend is running 10 minutes late. And it's a legit excuse, you're cool with it, whatever. But now you've got 10 minutes. Now, what's the best way to use those 10 minutes? Is it possible? Because you've now got a lot of constraints here. You've only got 10 minutes. So I've constrained your time. You can't necessarily let the activity go to completion. Or when you're trying to experience flow from playing tennis, you start the game, you finish the game, you go through the game. And even if you decide to quit in the middle of the game, it's sort of a mutual decision. It's not like, you've only got 15 minutes to play tennis, win, lose, or draw. You can take it to a completion point that is accepted by you. Whereas here, you've only got 10 minutes. Is it possible to experience flow or anything like it in those 10 minutes, knowing full well that you can't just dive in because, you're going to get interrupted?
So what should the person do? They have 10 minutes. What do they do now? They want to experience microflow.
So I don't have a definitive answer to that, but what the data suggest are a couple things. Number one, make sure that you know, again, who you are, what you like to do, what activities you can lose yourself in. Check your energy level. Check your mood. I found in my research that these things have an impact on whether you can jump into a flow experience or not. And sometimes you can't. So pick an activity that aligns with what you're in the mood to do, what you've got the energy for, keep in mind you come from somewhere at 5 o'clock, you're going somewhere, in 10 minutes, you're going into a conversation with somebody else or whatever that meeting is going to be about. So it's finding the right activity for that context. It's knowing, what you like to do. It's knowing what you can get lost in. It's knowing what you like doing for its own sake. It's knowing what kinds of things you can focus on. It's knowing what you have the energy to focus on, what challenges you, what level of skill you're capable of applying in that moment, and your general mood in that moment, positive, negative. You're not in a good mood, you're going to want to do something that improves your mood in order to have that flow experience or that flow type experience. So this much we have seen from the data. Still a lot more data to be collected on that.
Okay, and is the idea that they should do something that still will push them to their optimal effort point and all that just in a shorter time frame?
That's hard to say because, again, how long does it take us to get to the optimal level of effort? I mean, if I just, hand you a racket, throw you on the court and say, all right, play at your best, that's not happening, right? You need to warm up. You need to, get yourself going. You need to, warm up your head. You need to warm up your body and all the rest of that stuff. It's the same thing for a flow experience. I don't know how far we can get into that. And yet, just for instance, I like to play chess. Can I do a 5-minute blitz game right there and maybe get lost in that 5-minute blitz? Maybe. But then again, I'm also practiced. I've played a lot of 5-minute blitz. So for me, getting my head in the game for 5-minute blitz is a lot easier because I have that practice and I know that about myself. I know that I can experience flow playing blitz chess. And I know that I can have a good game out of that, and I'm practiced at it. So if I have those 10 minutes, I might fire up Lee chess and, go for a game.
Well, let's just discuss that example briefly. In a 5-minute game, do you get as deeply absorbed in it as you would if you played a longer game where you could really think about each move?
So the answer to that is actually sometimes in blitz chess, I go deeper, I get more into it because there's that high pressure situation that adds challenge for me. Sometimes when I'm playing a longer game, if I'm playing, let's say, a 30-minute game or especially an hour and a half game, I find that my mind can sometimes wander a little bit more, especially while I've thought through the situation to a first order and now I'm sort of letting it percolate. But that means my focus may temporarily disappear. I mean, one of the things we find with flow experiences in general is that it's not a unified experience. It's not like you start on a flow experience, you stay in flow the entire time, and then you exit at the end. It's not like that. We actually find that you go in and out of flow experiences all the time. So what I would point out is that in a 5-minute blitz chess game, there's not a lot of time to go in and out of flow. So I'm probably just going to be in it the whole way. Whereas in a 90-minute game, there's chances to go in and out of flow.
Right. I guess something I found if I play like a shorter game than that, like a 2 minute game, it doesn't feel like there's real, it's just like how fast can you move? And then it feels not that chess is so deeply meaningful, but it feels even more meaningless. And at least with 5 minutes, there's like, okay, you could think about it. It's not just about how fast you move. So I feel like there's a balance there. But I remember when I used to play longer games, and it's like, then you really could get into like the depth of the game. But yeah, I guess there's always a balance.
Well, it's also a matter of like how experienced of a chess player you are. So, for example, at my level of chess, the 90-minute games are a bit much for me because I'm not experienced enough in thinking through all the aspects of it, the positional, the pieces, the known theory. I'm not as up on all of that. And that really, really comes to play. That really, really comes to bear in the longer games. Whereas 5-minute blitz, at least at the level that I'm playing, is more about your fundamentals and not hanging pieces and making careless errors, which I still find even in a 5-minute game that most of my wins and losses are somebody hung a piece or somebody made a careless error. And I would say only about 25% of my games, which are the games that I really like to play for, are the games where somebody like outplayed the other. And those experiences, like either getting outplayed or doing the outplaying, is a really good experience. Because it's like, okay, I put forth my best effort, my opponent just did better. And like, all right, that was pretty cool. Like, that was a great combination. Or like, my opponent found a brilliancy. Like, no, I did not realize that knight sacrifice works. Oh, wow. And funnily enough, that experience of wow, even if I'm on the losing end of that, is still a really positive experience because like you're just admiring good chess.
Right.
I don't play 2-minute chess because at that point I'm just throwing things onto the board. Not like I mean, look, if you're Hikaru Nakamura and you are able to think that through, I mean, listen, that guy is like next level. I think he's actually like the top blitz chess player, especially for like bullet and something like that. I think he's actually like the number one guy for that. I imagine that for Hikaru Nakamura, when he's playing a 1 or 2 minute game, he experiences that 1 or 2 minutes as a lot longer than, let's say, you and I would be. You and I are probably experiencing that. We experience that as maybe just 2 minutes. And we do see that in flow experiences, that we see the time dilation. We see that either time speeds up or slows down. And I've had that, playing volleyball. And when I played in high school, I had some really great flow experiences on the court where, like, I played defense. The position, now they call it libero. In those days, we didn't really have one. But, when I'm defending against an attack, now I know intellectually that the time between the ball leaving the spiker's hand and the time that I get a hand on that ball is under a second. Feels like a lot more than that to me because I'm having a whole experience of watching the attacker's approach, watching the set, sensing where my teammates are going, reading the attack, reading the body language of the attacker, looking at my blockers, looking at the rest of my team. Where do I need to go? And like all these things are happening. And because I've been playing a long time, I'm aware of that and I'm experiencing all of that. Whereas to the onlooker, it's just spike, nab.
And I guess just getting back to like the microflow question. So somebody now has 10 minutes. What's the benefit of them getting into this like mini absorption state compared to the default where let's say they would just let their mind wander or browse the web or social media? What do they get by trying to like, no, even in these 10 minutes, I'm going to try to get somewhat absorbed in something?
So I think you get the positive experience. We are seeing that even with Microflow, it can be a highly positive experience, and that can be great for some people. But again, it's a matter of checking your energy level, and do you have the energy for that? Can you afford the energy it's going to take to have the absorption to dig into it and all the rest of that? But we do see that Microflow is a positive experience. And so having those positive experiences, that has a carryover effect too. And because it's not a full-fledged flow experience, you're not as tired afterwards. It's just like it looks like it could be a booster. And again, I don't have enough data to really call this a definitive shot, but what we're generally seeing in the data is that it could be a booster. So whereas you might have been going into that 5 o'clock meeting, 10 minutes later, you've had a booster to your mood. You've done something that feels good. If I've had a good, 5-minute blitz game and I come out of that feeling good. It's like now the person I'm about to encounter sees me feeling good. I feel good about that game. Win, lose, or draw if I played a good game.
And I know you mentioned that, like, full flow is something that isn't going to be so common. Is microflow, like, if someone goes through their workday, could they experience it for like a very good percentage of the time?
Once again, we're talking about a compromised. We're talking about a compromised aspect of flow, and we're often talking about, like, again, this is the suboptimal. So, like, we can have these boosts throughout the day, and it's possible to deliberately make these boosts. But what I would point out is, what are you making these boosts at the expense of? I would think of these boosts as more salvaging than, a goal. And that's kind of how I would think of a microflow. Like, go for the microflow experiences when you can't go for the flow experiences. Not, aim for the microflow experiences. It's like salvage it.
But if most people, let's say, are only going to get flow like, once a day and for a short period of time, the rest of the day, what should they aim for? Like, how do they feel that they're more optimal and perform at their best and feel the best from it?
Okay, so that is a whole that ends up falling into a whole philosophical discussion about the nature of work and all the rest of that stuff. So, like, in the interest of brevity, what I'm going to say is try to arrange your work so that you've got a chunk of time where you can have a flow experience, and I mean the real kind. Then to prepare yourself for opportunities where you might be able to salvage a period with microflow. So, for example, you're ready for something, but then it's delayed 10, 15 minutes. So then can you salvage that with a microflow experience? But aim for the flow experiences every day and recognize that those flow experiences are high energy experiences. And then after that, you're going to be tired. You're going to be depleted. You're going to need to recharge. So recognizing that you're probably only going to have one or two of those a day. And that's if you can arrange things to the optimum, no distractions, blocks of time where you can really get into it and where you're going to have time to recover afterwards and all the rest of that stuff. And that's how you really want to arrange your work. If you can't do that, then try to salvage that with some microflow experiences, but also recognize and recognize in advance that you're only going to be able to get some of this flow every day. You're not trying to arrange your days so that you're going to be in flow all day. That's unrealistic and it's not going to happen. Also, a lot of work is grind. And there's a lot of admin and there's a lot of meetings, and there's a lot of disorganization, and there's, how many times have you been to a meeting, and then said afterwards, like, I didn't need to be there. Like, somebody could have sent me a one-line email about what was talked about in this meeting and so on. And look, but there's still this sense that we needed to put FaceTime into that meeting. But I'm saying in general, to the extent that you have control of your workday, try to create pockets where flow can emerge, like blocks where flow can emerge. That'll be the best booster. If you can't do that, try to use the microflow experiences to salvage whatever you can, recognizing that, and those can still be like 30-minute experiences. We can have flow in 30 minutes. We can have microflow in 30 minutes. It depends. Again, it's taking the activity to completion. But most importantly, it's the sense of control here. And this is like when people ask me about employee engagement, like what is, the main trick to employee engagement or even flow at work, my answer is always the same: job control. To the greatest extent possible, employees should be able to decide what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, and how they're going to do it. And I mean, I do want to add, like, again, people sort of raise their eyebrows at that. I want to add the caveat, to the greatest extent possible. All I'm going to say about that is that extent is usually a lot greater than is currently the norm. And when people stop and think about it, it really could be more. And part of my business as a consultant is helping companies figure that out and helping them design the job tasks. So, for example, where they can put in AI and things along those lines, because you're giving people more control. But what we're seeing a lot in the workplace is people facing a lot of force. You're forced to attend a meeting that has absolutely nothing to do with you. You're forced to go into the office when there's really honestly no need for that. And so on. And it's like, we're being forced to use AI. If it's so great, why are we needing to be forced to do it? We're being forced to use AI, and that's also messing with us because it means I'm now being forced to use this tool that I'm not good with using, that I don't know how to use, that I don't want to use, or that I don't like the results of using. And people say, oh, practice with it, it'll get better. you know what, maybe it won't. And they haven't really thought that through, and they're not giving the employees the opportunity to make it their own. They're forcing people to make it their own, and you can't really force such things.
Okay, we covered a lot of different things about flow. If people want to find out more, where could they find out more, and where could they find out more about you online?
So the best place is to go to my website. It's www.qllab.org, qllab.org. And from there, you can find links to my blog. You can find links to some of the talks I've given. This podcast will be there as well. So that's the main place. And you'll find all the links are from my website. So just go to qllab.org and you'll find just about everything.
Okay, great. Orin, thanks so much.
Likewise, a pleasure. Thank you, Ariel.